The room went still. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not even the faint rustle of someone adjusting in his seat. It was the sort of silence that precedes the storm, taut, heavy, and thick with unsaid fear. You could hear each heartbeat, each breath, each swallow born of nervous anxiety from the jurors seated in their chairs, holding notepads they had not yet mustered the courage to put pen to paper. And all eyes, every one of them, were fixed on Janelle Brown. She sat at the defendant's table like a stone statue, her shoulders straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face impassive. Her blonde hair was drawn back tightly. No loose strands to play with. No telltale sign of nervousness. As though she'd spent years rehearsing for this moment. But nobody, not the jury, not the crowd, not even her relatives, could decipher what was making her so serene. The courtroom was filled to capacity. Individuals had been waiting hours before the doors even opened, with some sleeping in their vehicles overnight just to find a position inside. The trial had interested not merely the local population, but the entire country, and rightly so. This was not just any trial. This was the trial, the one that had destroyed a family America believed it knew. The charge? Conspiracy and obstruction of justice in one of the most contentious and enigmatic legal wars the Brown family had ever encountered. It was the sort of case that people hissed about in the checkout lines at the supermarket, the sort of tale that tabloids splashed across their front pages in red block letters. Everybody had a theory. Everybody believed they knew what was real. Nobody, not even those most intimate with it, really knew what was going to be revealed in this courtroom. Across the room from her sat Kody Brown. Usually boisterous, assertive, and brimming with dramatic flair, Kody appeared to be a shadow of his former self. His face was deathly pale, his hair a little tousled, his hands wringing in his lap. His eyes flicked about nervously, as if he sought a door no one else could perceive. Christine and Mary sat behind him. They weren't testifying here today. Not yet, but both women had been subpoenaed as witnesses to the trial. Christine was stiff, her gaze locked on Janelle as if she were looking for answers in her face. Mary stood with a leaning posture toward Christine, who was whispering low. The two were having an urgent but hushed conversation. From afar, it appeared that they were arguing something, whether they could even believe the charges against Janelle, or if all of this was merely a misfortunate misunderstanding. But there was no denying the tension in their expressions. A few seats away, Robin Brown sat by herself. Her chair was turned away from the rest of the family, her arms crossed over her chest tightly. She wasn't whispering, she wasn't fidgeting in her seat. She was just observing. And the way she was observing Janelle, it wasn't curiosity. It wasn't even suspicion. It was something colder. The judge, a towering silver-haired man with a voice that could fill a stadium, at last cleared his throat. The noise shattered the silence like glass smashing. "Mrs. Brown," he declared, his voice proper but not unkind. "Are you ready to proceed?" All eyes turned to Janelle once more. The cameras closed in. The reporters' pens hovered above notepads. Even the jurors sat forward, their faces eager for her response. And then, she spoke. "Yes, Your Honor," Janelle replied, her voice firm, calm, too calm. The words weren't boisterous. They weren't melodramatic. But somehow they sliced through the air like a blade. No quiver, no hesitation, no break in her voice. She might have been agreeing to a dinner table. If anyone in that room had hoped for a nervous collapse, or even a flash of fear in her face, they were bitterly disappointed. Janelle's cool was unflappable. And that, above the accusations, above the gossip, above the facts, was what put everyone on notice. Because someone who is aware they are guilty may shake. Someone who is aware they are innocent may beg. But Janelle, she did neither. She just waited. The trial was set to begin. And as the judge rummaged through the case file, turning over page after page of incriminating accusations, the atmosphere in the room appeared to thicken. No one was prepared for what would be exposed. Not the family, not the jury, not the world viewing it live on television. And not the individual who would soon find they were the true target of this trial. Even though their name wasn't on the defense table, It began with a buzz in the back row. A soft whisper between two reporters. They say there's new evidence. One grumbled. Something from a storage unit, the other said. The bailiff glared at them, and they fell silent once more. But the seed had been planted. The atmosphere in the room changed ever so slightly. Christine looked over at Mary. Mary looked over at Kody. And Kody, well, Kody didn't meet anybody's gaze. Outside, the hot parking lot was filled with dozens of protesters, holding signs, some supporting Janelle, others demanding she be convicted. The cacophony outside was perpetual chants, shouting, the sound of camera shutters clicking. But inside, in here, all that existed was the thudding beat of anticipation, the type that chokes your gut and makes you realize only after it's over that you were breathing quietly without even knowing it. The prosecutor rubbed his own pile of papers, but remained silent for the moment. He merely looked at Janelle intently for an extended, awkward minute, and she looked back at him. That was the aspect that shocked people the most. She wasn't like a person defending herself. She was like a person assessing an opponent. It was discreet, but anybody who noticed could observe it. The very slight lift of her chin, how her eyes did not flinch, how there was quiet assurance in her stillness. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of anybody. The judge glanced up. "We will continue," he asserted. And that was it. It was underway. No one had a clue yet, but within the course of this trial, secrets would be spilled, alliances would be broken, and the truth would tear apart the Brown family like a bolt of lightning. And it would all begin with Janelle. The prosecutor didn't hurry. He advanced slowly, deliberately, to the center of the courtroom, his black suit immaculate, his shiny shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. His face was impassive. No smile, no frown, but a look that indicated he was in complete command of the room. He paused, turned to the jury, and waited for the silence to hang a moment too long. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he started, his voice strong and level. "This case is about lies. Not the little white lies people make to be kind or save face. No, these are lies which can destroy lives. Lies that can destroy trust. Lies that can alter the course of justice itself." He pointed toward Janelle, who did not blink. "Her name, Janelle Brown, is in this courtroom today because we allege she knowingly and intentionally impeded an ongoing investigation, that she concealed the truth when truth was most important, and that she did so to cover for someone in this room." A murmur of whispers ran around the room. The judge rapped his gavel once, hard enough to quiet the room, and nodded to the prosecutor to proceed. He began pacing slowly, his eyes occasionally locking with a juror, before drifting back to Janelle. "You've seen the headlines. You've heard the rumors. But here in this courtroom, you're going to see something different. You're going to see proof. Proof that on a night that could have ended with justice, Mrs. Brown made sure it ended with silence instead." He faced back into the jury, voice lowering as if he was revealing a secret. "She got a telephone call at 11:47 p.m. Following that call, she left her house, traveled 18 miles to an unknown destination, and came back shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning. That evening, a critical piece of evidence disappeared." Gasps from the crowd again. "Coincidence?" the prosecutor inquired, his eyebrows raised. "We don't believe so. And after hearing all we have to offer, neither will you." Christine shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She was attempting to keep her expression even, but her hands were folded so tightly into a knot that her knuckles were white. Mary leaned in close to her, saying something too quiet to understand. Christine shook her head, her eyes fixed on Janelle. Janelle didn't flinch on the defense table, didn't blink once, as if she were made of ice. The prosecutor strode over to a big easel that stood close to the jury box. He turned over the first board, and there, pinned under it, was an enlarged photograph, a grainy security camera snapshot, of the back of a woman's head as she went into a dark passageway. "See this," he said, tapping the board. "The last known appearance of the individual who took that evidence away. Notice the height, the build, the color of the hair, the clothing. We have several witnesses who will come forward and testify that in their estimation, this was exactly what Mrs. Brown looked like." Several jurors leaned forward, looking at the picture. One woman hastily wrote something on her notepad, but the prosecutor wasn't done. He flipped to the next board. A printed record of phone calls. This is Mrs. Brown's phone log for the week of the incident. You'll see the call at 11:47 p.m. You'll also see the number she called repeatedly over the next 48 hours. A number registered to a prepaid phone purchased 2 weeks before the crime. That phone has never been recovered. He paused to allow the words to settle. And here's where it gets really interesting, he went on. The next day after the evidence disappeared, Mrs. Brown had a private meeting with someone. We have witnesses who will come forward and say they observed her hand a folder to this person. That folder was never heard of again. The jurors were quiet now, all pens suspended above paper but not moving. The prosecutor turned again to face Janelle, his voice growing harder. Mrs. Brown might appear serene today. She might sit here as if none of this is of consequence. But I assure you, it is. It's important to the individuals who weren't granted justice. It's important to the truth. And before we're through, you'll understand precisely why she went to such lengths to keep the truth hidden. He took a step back, his work for the moment complete. Kody's lawyer stood up slowly, fastening his suit jacket as he moved in front of the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with a well-practiced smile, what you just heard was a tale. A very sensationalized tale, but that's all you got. A tale. And tales are not evidence. He pushed past the prosecution's display boards without even glancing at them. My client is not a criminal mastermind, he went on. She is a mother, a friend, and a woman who has spent her life doing everything in her power to shield the people she cares about. That is not a crime. He paused, looking over at Janelle. She has nothing to hide. That's why she's standing here today. And once you've heard the truth, you'll see the same thing we do. That she is innocent. The two lawyers sat back down at their tables, the air still thick with unspoken charges. But one thing could not be denied. The jury was transfixed. Every face in the box was intent. Every hand was poised to write. Every mind was already attempting to fit things together what they just heard. Because this was no longer a trial. This was a puzzle. And the pieces weren't fitting quite as they ought. As she sat over toward the rear, Robin shifted restlessly. Her arms remained folded, but her eyes flicked over toward Janelle for a moment. When their gazes met, Robin hastily looked away. Nearly too hastily. It was discreet, but it wasn't missed. A journalist in the second row made a note. Robin doesn't meet Janelle's eye. Tension? The judge glared at the prosecution. Call your first witness. And that's when things started to really fall apart. The bailiff approached, his voice ringing out across the room. Call your first witness. The prosecutor consulted his notes, then spoke out clearly. The state calls Kody Brown. A murmur ran through the crowd. Kody paused, rising slowly, as if hesitant. She sidestepped direct eye contact with Janelle as she approached the witness stand. Having been sworn in, Kody sat stiffly, her hands crossed in her lap. The prosecutor didn't waste any time. Prosecutor Mrs. Brown, how would you characterize your relationship with the defendant? Kody swallowed hard. We've been close, you know. We've had a lot of years together. We've had the good and the bad together. Prosecutor, and in the weeks up to the evening in question, did you notice any differences in her behavior? Kody paused once more. She was distant, more reserved than she normally is. She told me not to trouble myself about some things. And when I asked her what she meant, she just said, it's better if you don't know. Gasps resonated through the crowd. Janelle remained still, staring at Kody, but her expression impassive. The prosecutor leaned in closer to Kody. And on the night of the incident, did you see Mrs. Brown? Kody nodded. Yes, she stopped at my house earlier in the evening. She visited for about 15 minutes. And then left in a hurry. She told me she had to take care of something important. The prosecutor waited for dramatic effect. Did she explain what that something was? Kody spoke a little lower. No. And I didn't press her. I wish I had. The defense attorney stood up. Mrs. Brown, isn't it true that you and my client have had conflicts in the past? Kody's posture grew rigid. We've had differences. Yes. But this isn't about that. The attorney pursued. Differences great enough that your testimony today might be affected by personal feelings. Christine's eyes clipped. No, I'm telling the truth. The air was electric with tension between them. As Christine left the stand, the judge summoned the next witness. The state calls Mary Brown. Mary strode to the stand, her heels clicking on the floor. Her stride was confident, but her eyes flashed momentarily in Janelle's direction before she took a seat. Prosecutor, Mrs. Brown, you've been acquainted with the defendant for decades. Would you say she's a person of integrity? Mary hesitated, as if weighing her words. For the most part, yes. But there have been times when she's kept things to herself. Significant things. Prosecutor. And do you remember seeing her on the night of the accident? Mary nodded. Yes, I saw her coming out of a building late at night. She had a folder in her backpack. When I asked what it was, she said, just some work stuff. But she would not show it to me. A murmur passed through the courtroom. The defense attorney rose, clearly ready to take apart this testimony. Mrs. Brown, do you have any idea what was in that folder? No, Mary admitted. Then wouldn't it be possible that it was just what she claimed? Work-related. Mary hesitated, then blew out a sigh. Possible, yes, but the way she reacted, it didn't sound like run-of-the-mill work. The defense attorney smirked slightly, as if pleased he'd sown a seed of doubt in the jury's mind. But the room became even more strained when the prosecutor called the third witness. The state calls Kody Brown. Every head swiveled toward Kody as he crept from his chair. He moved like each step toward the witness. Stand was heavier than the last. He refused to look at Janelle at all. He sat back in his chair after being sworn, his hands crossed in front of him. Prosecutor, Mr. Brown, how would you characterize your relationship with the defendant? Kody's voice shook a little. We were close. I trusted her more than anyone, sometimes more than I should have. Prosecutor, in the days leading up to the incident, did you see anything out of the ordinary? Kody gazed down at his hands. She began taking more phone calls in private. She was on edge. I believed maybe it was stress. I did not believe it was this. Prosecutor, and when you discovered the evidence had disappeared, what did you think? Kody paused. His eyes finally darted toward Janelle, a fleeting, near-pained look. My first thought was that she knew something more than she was admitting. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brisk. Mr. Brown, have you and my client had personal and financial disagreements of late? Kody fidgeted uncomfortably. We've disagreed over money, yes. And those arguments escalated. Yes, they did, Kody admitted grudgingly. Is it possible your testimony here today is clouded by those arguments? Kody jerked his head back and forth. No, this isn't about that. This is about the truth. But his voice broke on the final word, and the defense attorney picked it up. The room was already abuzz when the prosecutor stood again. The state calls Hannah Miller. The name was meaningless to all but the majority of the audience. Yet Janelle's eyes blazed, the first genuine indication of emotion since the trial commenced. Hannah, a young woman with curly hair, appeared nervously at the stand. She was sworn in, then sat down, her eyes shifting between the prosecutor and Janelle. Prosecutor, Miss Miller, how do you know the defendant? I worked as a family assistant for the Browns. Hannah responded quietly. I assisted with schedules, errands, with getting documents organized. Prosecutor, and on the evening in question, did you hear or see anything out of the ordinary? Hannah wrung her hands in her lap. Yes. I heard Janelle on the phone. She said, they can't find out about this, not yet. The words suspended there, thinning the air like smoke. Prosecutor, do you have any idea who she was talking to? No. Hannah confessed. She hung up when she saw me. The defense attorney leaned forward. Miss Miller, could those words be about anything? Anything that had nothing to do with this case? Hannah pressed her lips together. I suppose. But it didn't sound like that. She sounded anxious, urgent. The defense attorney slowly nodded, then said nothing more. As Hannah descended from the stand, the courtroom was charged with electricity. The jury had listened to Christine, Mary, Kody, and now, a young stranger who seemed to have nothing to gain by lying. Every witness offered a piece to the puzzle, but the pieces still didn't fit. Some directed towards Janelle's culpability. Others spoke in code of something greater, something on the horizon. And Janelle herself, she remained silent, drinking in every phrase, her face inscrutable. If she was furious, terrified, or about to shatter, she didn't indicate it. It was amidst that silence that the audience first came to understand something disconcerting. Perhaps Janelle wasn't the one who should fear. Perhaps someone else was. The prosecutor fussed with his tie, his face unreadable. "Your Honor," he said with measured gravity, "the state would like to produce new evidence." There was a murmur of shock that went around the courtroom. Journalists sat forward, quill pens at the ready. Mary and Christine exchanged fast, worried looks. Robin's body grew rigid, her eyes locked on the prosecutor's hands, as if she already expected it. The bailiff approached the table of the prosecutor and took out a medium manila envelope, its edges frayed, as though it had been opened too many times. The envelope was taped shut, a line of red evidence tape across the top. The prosecutor approached the judge. "This," he said, "was found just 72 hours ago, in a storage locker that had been rented in the name of Janelle Brown." The judge looked over his spectacles. And where was this locker situated? "On the outskirts of Flagstaff." The prosecutor answered. "The same building where other members of the Brown family have been known to keep personal items." Janelle's expression didn't change. Not a blink. Not a twitch. The prosecutor looked in her direction, as though expecting a reaction. But when none was forthcoming, he broke the seal and pulled out one object. A folded, slightly crumpled bit of paper, contained in a clear plastic sheath. He held it up to be seen by the jury. "This," he started, "is a piece of a handwritten letter. The letter was matched by a forensic expert to an individual in this room. And the signature at the bottom is Robin Brown's." The response was instant. Gasp inhaled the air, followed by an undulating wave of whispers. Robin's eyes widened, her mouth dropping in visible astonishment. She shook her head, mouthing something resembling "no," repeatedly. Christine leaned over Mary, mouthing frantically. Kody's head swiveled toward Robin, his forehead furrowing. The prosecutor stepped back toward the jury box, holding the sleeve close enough for the front row to clearly see it. The letter contents indicate that Mrs. Brown, the defendant, was a part of a secret arrangement to take and destroy evidence from an ongoing investigation. And who was behind that arrangement? If this letter is true, Robin Brown. The courtroom erupted once more. The judge struck the gavel loudly. "Order! There will be order in this courtroom." Once the commotion had died down, the prosecutor resumed. "Now the defense will be able to say that this letter is a forgery. They'll say that it was planted. But where the locker was located, the fact that there was Mrs. Brown's other personal belongings inside, and that this letter was also found with them, all speak for themselves." Janelle did not move. Her calmness was positively terrifying. The defense lawyer rose. "Your Honor, we object. The authenticity of this letter, even with so-called forensic handwriting comparisons, is not yet established. Also, the storage locker was left unsecured at times." And the prosecutor intervened. "The locker was secured by a combination specific to Mrs. Brown." "Oh. Your Honor," the judge raised a hand. "The objection stands. The evidence will be admitted, but its credibility will be up to the jury to determine." Robin's breathing was rapid. She shifted in her seat, her eyes darting back and forth from the letter to Janelle. If she was innocent, she certainly didn't appear to be at ease. Christine's eyes narrowed, studying Robin with distrust. Mary folded her arms, leaning back in her chair. The prosecutor faced the judge. "At this time, we'd like to call Mrs. Brown herself to the stand." Every head turned toward Janelle. She rose slowly, smoothing her skirt, and walked to the witness stand. The click of her heels on the courtroom floor was the only sound in the room. She was sworn in, her right hand raised without hesitation. And then she sat, leaning slightly forward. "Prosecutor, Mrs. Brown, had you known this letter existed prior to it being shown in this court today?" Janelle, "Yes." Gasps. Even the prosecutor blinked for a split second before regaining composure. "Prosecutor, you knew? How is that?" Janelle, because I left it there. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The judge slammed his gavel. Order! Order! When order was restored, the prosecutor's voice was strained. Admitting you stashed this letter away in your own storage facility? Janelle, yes, but not for the reason you assume. Her tone was even, but her eyes now wore a hard glint. Prosecutor, then why Mrs. Brown? Why stash a letter that might incriminate someone for a crime? Janelle breathed slowly, looking around the room. Because the truth is dangerous, and the revealing of it too soon would have endangered lives. Kody shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Robin's fists were clenched on the bench so hard her knuckles turned white. Christine and Mary leaned forward, their eyes glued to her face. Prosecutor, dangerous for whom? Janelle's eyes fixed on the prosecutor. For whoever was responsible for the actual erasure of that evidence. And I'll let you know right now. It wasn't me. The prosecutor scowled. You're saying Robin Brown authored this letter independently? Janelle shook her head deliberately. No, I'm saying Robin didn't write it all together. Another tidal wave of confusion rolled through the courtroom. The prosecutor blinked. Mrs. Brown, are you asserting that this letter is a forgery? Yes, said Janelle. A forgery meant to turn us against one another. To label me as an accomplice and to label her, she indicated Robin, as the mastermind. Robin's mouth dropped open. That's not true, she exclaimed. But the judge stopped her with a hard look. The prosecutor stepped in closer to the stand. If what you're saying is true, Mrs. Brown, who forged the letter? Janelle leaned forward slightly, her voice low but clear. The same person who's been behind this entire mess from the start. The same person who stood to gain the most from the evidence disappearing. The same person who planted that letter in my storage locker. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto one person in the room. Kody Brown. The response was immediate and explosive. Kody leapt to his feet. That is a lie, he roared, face purpling with rage. You're taking everything out of context. The judge pounded the gavel. Mr. Brown, sit down or you will be taken out of this courtroom. Kody sat, reluctantly, his jaw muscles working, but his glower at Janelle could have sliced glass. Janelle went on, unmoved. I have evidence. Evidence that Kody broke into my storage unit without my knowledge. Evidence that he falsified that letter and left it there. And evidence that he did all this to cover himself up after a money scandal that would have ruined him. Her words lingered. You'll hear from a witness, who observed him at the facility. You'll see video the prosecution has not bothered to present to you yet. And when you do, you'll realize that I wasn't hiding a crime. I was hiding the fact that the head of this family would rather ruin someone's life than have his own reputation collapse. The judge ordered a recess, but the harm was already done. The courtroom hummed like a beehive. Reporters frantically tried to organize their notes. Christine's face was a combination of shock and vindication. Mary glared at Kody with a look that could incinerate. Robin sat like a statue, her eyes darting between Kody and Janelle. And Kody resembled a guy who just discovered the ground under his feet was going to collapse. The whole courtroom was leaning forward, as Janelle stood, hands on the lip of the witness stand. The only noise interrupting the quiet was the soft whir of air conditioning. Even the court stenographer had frozen for a split second, eyes flicking up from the keys to observe. Janelle slowly scanned the room with her eyes, making contact with the jurors individually. You all believe I'm keeping something from you, she said, her tone low and even. And you're correct, I am. But not for the reasons you think. The jury exchanged glances. Kody shifted in his chair, his foot tapping anxiously against the floor. Robin clutched the edge of her seat, looking as though she might bolt at any second. Janelle continued. That letter you saw earlier, the one with Robin's name, it wasn't mine, and it wasn't even written by Robin. It was planted. The prosecutor's eyebrow rose, as though questioning whether or not to object, allowing her to go on. The judge leaned forward, a hint of an imperative. Go on, he commanded. Janelle's voice gained force. And I know perfectly well who put it there. The room was silent. She raised her arm, her finger wavering minutely, not with fear, but with the burden of the moment. and aimed her finger directly at Kody Brown. Gasps filled the courtroom. A whisper swept like wildfire along the benches of spectators. Christine's mouth fell open. Mary's eyes widened. Robin's mouth hung open in shock. Kody's face contorted in disbelief. "That's a lie," he shouted, banging his hand down on the table. The judge slammed his gavel. "Mr. Brown, you will be quiet unless spoken to." Janelle refocused on the jury. "I've lived for months under the cloud of these allegations, aware that I had committed no crime. The fact is, Kody manipulated the whole thing. He needed somebody to blame for lost financial records relating to a family trust fund, funds that somehow vanished." The prosecutor rose to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is conjecture." The judge held up a hand. "Overruled. The witness may proceed." Janelle's gaze darted to Kody, now cornered. "He appeared in my office one night late," she said, her voice cracking, "and asked me to dispose of some files. He said they would destroy him. That if the truth was ever known, it would ruin not only his reputation, but the family." Her voice turned chilly. "I didn't do it. And days later I discovered that letter deliberately put in my storage space. Now suddenly the proof was against me. And conveniently, Kody got off scot-free." Christine put her hand over her mouth. Mary looked at Kody with new eyes. Robin's gaze switched between the two of them, her face ashen. "And that's not all," Janelle said. "There's a witness. Someone Kody thought was long gone. But I found them. They're here today." The gallery erupted in whispers. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Is this witness prepared to testify?" Janelle nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. They were ready the moment I decided to stop protecting him." The rear doors of the courtroom groaned open. Every head swiveled as a person entered. A middle-aged man in a simple gray suit, holding a folder stuffed with paper. He moved toward the stand at a slow and deliberate step, his eyes fixed on Kody. "State your name for the record." The judge directed the moment the man arrived at the stand. "Mark Ellison," he answered. "And your connection to this case?" the judge inquired. Mark breathed in. "I'm a Brown family accountant, previously. They paid me to do their books for more than a decade, until I found discrepancies in the books. Money was being diverted into a secret account under an alias. When I challenged Mr. Brown, he threatened me, told me if I reported it, I'd live to regret it." Kody shook his head violently. But Mark continued. "I resigned my position, but I made copies of the documents. And when I saw the reports about Mrs. Brown being charged, I knew exactly what had gone on. He framed her." Mark opened the folder and passed it to the bailiff, who took it to the judge. There were spreadsheets, bank statements, and emails directly connecting Kody to the transfers. The judge's face turned dark as he riffled through the pages. "This is outrageous," Kody bellowed, rising from his chair. "She's lying. They're all lying." The judge banged the gavel. "Mr. Brown, sit down." Janelle's hands were shaking now, but there was a spark in her eyes. "I remained silent because I believed revealing him would ruin what little peace remained in this family. But peace based on lies is no peace. It's a prison. It's a prison." The jury was entranced. Each and every one of them had their eyes on her, as if they were too afraid to blink and miss something. The prosecutor, who was now clearly uneasy, tugged his tie. The defense attorney, however, sat back and put on a tiny, knowing smile. Robin finally broke her silence, barely above a whisper. "Kody, is it true?" Kody did not reply. His face had turned white. The judge faced him. "Mr. Brown, in view of the seriousness of this testimony and evidence, I am directing an adjournment at once to allow the jury to study this material. We will resume tomorrow morning." The gavel crashed with a loud crack. As the room descended into chaos, journalists rushed toward the aisle, shoving microphones in front of them. Christine hugged Janelle, softly saying, "You did the right thing." Mary stood unmoving, her eyes on Kody filled with betrayal and incredulity. Robin clumped down heavily, as if her legs were no longer able to hold her. Kody, with murmuring lawyers all around him, gave Janelle a glance, one of anger, one of fear. Janelle gazed back at him unflinching. She had entered that courtroom accused, embarrassed and cornered. Now she emerged with the truth on her side, and the family's darkest secret out of the shadows. And everyone knew, when the trial picked up where it left off, the real battle was only just commencing.